the latest episode of Surgeons' Lives. I'm your host, John Monson. My guest today is Professor Rowan Parks, who, at the time of recording this podcast, had just finished a 3-year tenure as President of the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh. Born in Belfast to a surgical family where his father, George, was a colorectal surgeon who ultimately became President of the Royal College of Surgeons. In Ireland, Rowan followed a different specialty pathway, becoming an HPB surgeon in Edinburgh. Early on in his career at the University of Edinburgh, he developed an interest in surgical education, and this took him down the pathway towards the College of Surgeons in Edinburgh and ultimately culminated in his presidency. In a fascinating conversation today, we hear about his early upbringing throughout the Troubles in Ireland, what he learned from sitting listening to his dad talking about college politics, and what he's learned through his 3 years' experience of presidency, traveling the world and learning how to manage situations and always being on message and available. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to send whatever comments you may have. So without further ado, let's go straight over and listen to Professor Rowan Parks and his surgical journey. I'm John Monson, and this is Surgeons' Lives.
Well, as I say, thanks for joining this very little podcast, which is grandly titled Surgeons' Lives, but it's the subtitle really that I'm more interested in, which is the stuff that matters, which is often not the medals and the papers and the titles, etc. But I always start by asking people, and same with you, I'll start by just give us a potted history of life and career, starting with the words "I was born in."
Yes, so I was born in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Almost 60 years ago. I have my 60th in a few weeks' time, so 1966. Grew up, 2 younger sisters. I was the oldest of the family. There was 3 of us. Normal schooling, and like many people in Northern Ireland, stayed in Northern Ireland to go to medical school, to go to university. So I was there for quite a while before relocating a bit further down the line. But yeah, childhood, very happy childhood, great memories, a lot of family times. On my father's side, quite a big family. I had lots of cousins on that side. On my mother's side of the family, just 2 cousins. And in terms of age, I was probably closer to the cousins of my age, but certainly some on my father's side stretched quite a few years ahead of me. He was the youngest of 7.
Right.
So I had a lot of older cousins, aunts, uncles, but a lot of time with family. Summer holidays were often spent with my grandparents, or at least some of the time with my grandparents. My father's side, they came from a farming community, so when I stayed with them, yeah, it was fun on the farm, doing all the things.
Where was the farm?
So it was near Lough Neagh, little place called Ardmore,
Right.
Lurgan, Gavin, right on the shores of Lough Neagh. A mixed farm, so some sheep and cattle, some crops, and then a lot of my wider family had other farms, and a lot of them from the farming community. But on my other side, my grandparents lived by the coast, by the water, by the sea, and so a lot of my childhood memories again were spending time on the water. My grandfather had a little fishing boat, so things like that. But a very, very happy childhood.
Really?
As our own family, we tended to spend a lot of our holidays camping, and mainly in Europe. So that was the traditional thing every July. Father took an extended period of leave, and we all jumped in the car, headed down onto mainland Europe, with a big tent and had many happy camping holidays under canvas, usually headed towards the Mediterranean, France, Spain, Italy. Got to the water, got to the coast, and that's the memories I had. Many happy childhood holidays.
It's those memories are, of course, of their time. Um,
Sure.
uh, the as you say, when your dad would take an extended time off, I mean, unheard of these days,
Exactly.
totally. Um, and
Exactly.
and obviously, I'll come back to, because I have to ask the obvious question, even though I think we probably know the answer in terms of who your role models and mentors were your early. But in the midst of this, it has to be acknowledged that in the midst of this idyllic childhood, um, it was bang in the middle of the Troubles.
It was. It
Uh,
was indeed.
uh, and
I grew up in the late 60s, 70s, into the
yeah,
80s, and that was the height of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. I went to school right in the centre of Belfast. My school was literally 2 blocks away from the Europa Hotel,
yeah,
known as the most bombed hotel in the world. And typically, once a year, at least, we were evacuated for either a bomb scare or a bomb that went off. The school was evacuated. You had to head out the other way, and you were just dismissed, told to find your own way home. Um, yeah, it was life as I knew it, so I didn't know anything else. I didn't know how you compared it. The news was just full of the troubles, but it was local news. So you didn't realize that there were many other parts of the world that had a very different upbringing. I think from a very personal point of view, I was fairly shielded. Never had anybody really close or no family caught up or harmed in any way. But it was just what you heard in the news almost every day. It was constant. And
it
the
was,
visible signs of it, walking the streets in the
yeah,
center of town, a lot of army, police, all guns, armored vehicles just drove around. That was normal. And again, I had no other concept really of what life was like other than that. The center of the city was completely within security gates. So if you went in to the very center of town, your bags were searched, and school bags, everything was always checked. There was no free movement without getting searched. So that was life until the late 90s.
it's interesting. I mean, I didn't. I grew up through that period as well, and a little older than you, but I didn't live there. But it always struck me in my visits that, I had family up there,
Mm.
that what was presented on national news was very different to what was known locally.
Yeah,
As in, the national news made it look like, it was a bad night in Beirut, but, with
yeah,
random this and random that. But of course, the reality was that the locals knew differently. It was much more locally focused, and because it's a small Irish community, everyone knew
yeah,
everyone and what was going
yeah.
on, really. Except the only people who didn't seem to know what was going on was the army, probably.
No, I think there's a lot of truth in that. And Mark, the part of the city where we grew up was very, very peaceful, very quiet, never any real trouble at all. And you knew what areas to stay away from. So once you got a bit more of independence, and particularly once you start driving, you knew where you didn't go, you stayed away from.
Yeah, yeah.
But for 95% of the population, life was, in many senses, very normal,
Yeah.
and certainly I had never came across anything personally or with any of our close families. So
So I'll just ask you one last question about that. A mutual colleague of ours, Declan Carey,
yeah,
a trainee of mine, and etc. Declan grew up in a dangerous part of the world, in Newry,
yeah,
And I remember him telling me that he realized at one point that he was going to have to make a decision as to which direction he went, because it was just not possible to sit on the fence. And so his decision was that he left, because as he
Yeah.
said, if he didn't leave, he would have ended up, on the barricades or being interned or whatever it might be. Now, whether you made that decision or that's what happened with you as well. But I know not necessarily for that reason, but did you have that sense that there was always a sense that people needed to decide what they were going to do?
I never, personally never felt that way at all. I had every intention of staying in Northern Ireland. I did spend a year in Uri, so I understand exactly, the situation Declan found himself in. I was there for a year as a registrar, but during my training. But apart from that, I loved my upbringing. Very close to the family. My wife's family was from Belfast, and a lot of our friends and our entire sort of social network was all in Northern Ireland. So we had every intention of staying. And relocating to Edinburgh was absolutely only planned for 12 to 18 months with a view to come back. I'm sure we'll come back to it, but things work out slightly different to that. But no, I loved growing up in Northern Ireland. Still love going back, and it is a beautiful part of the world
Oh
in
yeah,
terms of having holidays. Just fantastic, and things have changed remarkably. It's a very, very different place now.
yeah.
But we loved it, and that was our life, and that was our social environment, family environment, and I had every intention of staying.
So back to the main story. Early influences in life. I had the privilege of knowing your dad well, who I would describe as a very different individual to you.
I'm
um,
intrigued.
a very presented a very gentle soul, a very and very charming man. That's not to say you're not a charming person, of course, but I'm guessing it would be fatuous to say that he wouldn't was not an influence on you in terms
Oh,
of
huge,
yeah,
huge influence. So yeah, growing up through secondary level education, decisions, career choices. All I had known at home was medical talk. My father was a surgeon. My mum was a nurse, and so a lot of the conversations around the dinner table tended to focus on what had happened during the day, and I was just intrigued. I was fascinated by the types of activities. And yeah, that was obviously a very early influence. Father, somebody I hugely respected, and that was a big draw, I'm sure, to do medicine. But at school, at that stage, there wasn't the opportunity really to go on work experience. It wasn't really easy to organize, and what I had to do was a week's work experience. So I said, well, I'm going to look at something else, and I spent a week in an accountancy office to see what I like, a sort of desk job. I always enjoyed numbers, maths. So I thought, well, let's see what that looks like in terms of counting. That was my basic understanding of accountancy at that time. But I enjoyed the week, but it didn't really enthuse me the same way as hearing about the medical stories and even seeing little bits on whatever was televised. So I can only really remember wanting to do medicine, and I, wasn't the high flying at school. I, wasn't one who was winning prizes. I seemed to get through. I was passing
No,
things, and
enough.
the grades at that stage were still pretty competitive. So I thought, well, I'll just have to give it a go. And I applied, and like many people in Northern Ireland, they end up staying in medical to go to medical school there. Very high proportion stay locally to go to medical school. So I went to Queens. I got in. I got my grades and got into Queens University to study medicine. I had a few other offers. So if it hadn't worked there, possibly could have ended up going to some of the London schools or perhaps even to Scotland at that stage. But I got my offer from Queen's, and that was my first choice. So I ended up starting my medical career there.
We had in my year in medical school in Dublin, we had always had some people from the north
Yeah,
who were known always as A-level wasters, and the reason they were known as A-level wasters was because, unlike the rest of us, they came down with a small grant
yeah.
which provided them with drinking money for the whereas nobody else had the drinking money. So the A-level wasters were the guys that came down with enough money to drink.
That's fine. No, well, I stayed in Belfast, and I lived at home actually, which again a lot of people in my course in my year did. The big city, bigger population. Many of my classmates were all and we all lived at home, but we still got involved very much in university life, sport, whatever. And there was a great environment. It was a relatively small community, so a lot of people knew each other. There were a lot of my classmates had parents who were medical, so it wasn't very unusual that, three or four people in your small teaching group all had parents who were in the medical field. But it was still a common question when you went on to a ward. You had your name badge checked. Oh, you're so and so's father or
Yeah.
son, daughter, whatever. So again, that was part of the maybe bit unique characteristic of going to Queens, certainly back in the 1980s.
So on balance, and I've had the opportunity to ask the sons and daughters of in various walks of life of iconic figures, and people like Sterling Moss and stuff like
Yeah,
that. Talking to his son and stuff. On
yeah,
balance, a good thing or a bad thing in overall, to have to be in the shadow, at least at that time,
yeah.
of somebody like your dad, who, unless people have been living under a rock, we should acknowledge was the president of the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland.
Yeah, yeah. So in balance, positive, plus, plus, plus. I've never, never had any negativity about that at all. Yes, huge role model for me in terms of his integrity, lifestyle, ways of working, his personality. But also because, at least what I heard was he was somebody who was hugely respected by his peers, by certainly those that engaged with him professionally. Always spoke very fondly of him, so it was never anything I was embarrassed about in any way or ashamed of. He was very much part of the medical community at that time, locally in Northern Ireland, and then clearly got involved with activities nationally, internationally. So I was, incredibly proud to grow up, but also very aware that I couldn't use that in any way to influence things, and certainly he was very actively involved in the training aspects, postgraduate training at the time when I was finishing medical school. He would have sat in every appointments panel up until I was coming out. He, looked after all the training grades. He was the chair of the training committees, both basic surgical training, the higher surgical training. He was a regional advisor for training, connected to certainly the Irish College, the Edinburgh College. He was an examiner, and as I came through each stage, he had to excuse himself from all those appointment committees and training committees, and get out of the way almost.
Yeah. No, sure.
And I don't think there was any nepotism in any way, but it was that sort of community in Northern Ireland at the time where everybody knew everybody anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And
Well,
it's just the
and
way life
surgery.
was. We've all got used to it. Yeah.
I mean, surgery is a small world, number one.
Well, that's true.
And Ireland, top and bottom, is
Yeah.
highly insular. I mean,
Yeah. I agree.
it's a small country. There's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah. And one of the nice things was, you just got to know a lot of his colleagues who, were at the consultant level, and that included a lot of the colleagues in Dublin as well. So I got to know through a lot of the RCSI activity, loads of his peers, but also my peers, and it's a small community, as you said, John, very much so.
Okay, so off you go to Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And never to be seen again, basically unexpectedly. But you obviously did well, landed on your feet, and did a fairly traditional academic, what's the word, progression up the ladder.
Yeah. I've done some research in Belfast, and again, there were a number of role models who I still hugely valued during my time in Northern Ireland. People like Tom Diamond helped, support in my research. He was a HPB surgeon, triggered my interest. Brian Rowlands, ultimately head of the department at the time, huge influence in sort of my career trajectory as I was focusing more on liver pancreatic surgery, and particularly George Johnson, a family friend, but also an incredibly respected surgeon technically, and with patients. And there was some huge influences. So the reason to go to Edinburgh was very much to pursue HPB surgery. And interestingly, Professor James Garden in Edinburgh, had been one of my external reviewers of my thesis when it was submitted. And so he knew a little bit, I guess, about me. I'd been fortunate to have done quite well in my research in terms of publications and presentations, and I guess just when I was applying for a fellowship year at the end of my training, I'd won the Moynihan Medal at the Association of Surgeons based on my research. So I guess a couple of those things came together, and James, when he got the letter, very kindly offered to take me on as a fellow, initially for 12 months, and then during a bit of backward and forward, we sort of maybe extended that, said I'll come for 18 months. But I had every intention to go back to Northern Ireland. However, landed in Edinburgh as a fellow involved in HPB and liver transplant surgery, and absolutely thrived on it, loved it.
Was that,
and was hugely supportive.
When Hilary Sanfey was there?
Yeah. I arrived just after Hilary left. So the transplant service in Edinburgh started in 1992, led by James. Hilary was there at the time and at the outset, and was there for a number of years afterwards. I arrived in Edinburgh 1998. Hilary had just left, maybe a year or two before that, but there was still a bit of contact and communication, so very much aware of the time she spent there. I thoroughly enjoyed it. The unit was relatively small at that stage. I think there was about 4 consultants in the HPB and transplant side, and to compare that to what we have now, it has grown beyond measure. But it was a really cohesive group, incredibly committed staff from the surgical, anesthetic, and nursing staff. It was a wonderful unit. And yeah, I managed to do a couple of little research projects during that fellowship year. And then a job came up, which was a senior lecturer job, an academic post, which, I was asked, do you think you'd actually leave Northern Ireland instead? So of course I would have enjoyed it so much. The family had settled. We'd travelled over at that stage with three young children. The eldest, which I think had just started school, but the next two were preschool, but they had just settled in. We'd made some friends. The family had made some friends. And we were very settled. And actually, it would probably have been more an upheaval to go back again. But the job was offered, and yeah, here we are, 28 years later, still in Edinburgh, and we love it. Absolutely love it.
The rest is history, as you say. Now,
Yeah.
the internet can describe your career between then and now, etc. But you rose up through the ranks and developed your interest in education and etc. And then obviously become more and more engaged in the college. Every president or past president I've ever spoken to, when I ask them the question, when did you decide that I might be president? Always says the same thing, which I assume is in a booklet given out to all politicians to always say, it was never my intention to have any, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Now, whilst I accept there's a degree of that, but there must have been a moment in your college career where you had to at least acknowledge that, this might actually happen, and is this something that I want to do? Because it's a huge undertaking. I mean, you probably have more air miles now than you've ever envisaged. I mean, it's a massive undertaking. So talk me through that a little bit.
I guess I understood a little bit about college life again because I was just fascinated from the stories of my father when he was president and in the whole period, not only just when he was president but on council of the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, and I loved hearing about that and the international activity that he was involved in. And then when he became vice president, because of even the commitment of that, he got an apartment in Dublin to enable him to at least stay a little bit there. And from Edinburgh, we used to go over when there were big college meetings in Dublin. So this was at the end of the 1990s. He became president in the year 2000. So the late 90s and through that period, then when he was president, 2000, 2002, I went to a lot of the college events, charter meetings, Millen meetings, and just loved the activity, loved hearing what the Irish College were up to. And I guess that gave me a bit of an insight to what college life was all about. I actually did my initial fellowship in Dublin, so I had a fellowship at the Royal College of Surgeons of Ireland. But when I moved to Edinburgh, once I was appointed and staff, and I think it was James Garden said, you have to become an Edinburgh Fellow as well. So I went through the process of becoming Fellow of the Edinburgh College without having to take the exam. So a fellowship without exam, became an Edinburgh Fellow.
That's a disgrace. Let me tell you this: when I moved to Leeds as a registrar, I had my Irish fellowship, and I can never remember who it was, but some old guy said to me, "When are you going to do the fellowship?" To which I said, "What do you mean? I have a fellowship?" And he went, "The proper fellowship." So I actually went and did the proper fellowship in London. To the extent that I was a senior registrar at this stage. And
Yeah,
I was examined by Phyllis George,
yeah,
who on inguinal or femoral hernia. And I remember her at the sherry bit, at the end.
yeah, yes, yeah,
She
yeah.
came up to me and she said, congratulations. And she said, exactly who are you? I said, it's a long story. So yes,
Well,
I got
this was shortly after
I had to I paid my money.
do the exam. Well,
Exactly.
yeah, I was a few years, maybe appointed a consultant, a few years, and it was something that was very kindly offered. So I started getting involved, I guess, locally in some of the education events, master classes, and then started doing a little bit of examining, which was, I guess, my route in. And then again, a few senior people, including some people on council, said, "Would you think of applying for council?" Now, I was relatively young at that time, but back in 2008, so I'd been a consultant about 9, 10 years. But I thought, well, we don't want it to be just older folks running the colleges. I'm very keen to get involved, and I enjoyed doing the education and examining activity, and got involved, got onto council back in 2018, and I've loved it, and it was an incredibly enriching. I really enjoyed the discussions, the types of strategy that was being considered, the involvement in curricula and setting standards, and it was things that I sort of felt these are really important, and valued that. So that sort of led to the next, ended up in almost 16 years involved in the college council. And I guess, yeah, I got the handbook. You never think you're going to be president, but I guess I had a little understanding of the commitment involved, the time involved, the types of responsibility because of my father, there's no doubt.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that I ever aspired to it, but I guess all of a sudden realize, you're becoming one of the more, I wouldn't say more senior, but more longest serving members of council, and you understand how the system works. And in the Edinburgh College, you apply to become and stand for the office bearer positions. There's no guarantees because each position is independent. It's not an automatic transition. But I applied. Well, it would have been back 2018, I think it was, for vice president, and was successful, and then enjoyed that, and still trying to maintain more or less a full clinical academic job, still doing clinical work, major HBB surgery. At that time, I was also involved in NHS education surgery, a sort of postgraduate oversight role of postgraduate training in Scotland. So I sort of understood a lot of the technicalities and had a lot of the contacts across the UK and Ireland, in terms of education training rules. And I guess that had become my USP, my principal focus. And for you, that was just before COVID. We got through COVID. It was an extended period for that office bear team, and then I put myself forward for president, and it's a council election, but that's what led to the last role, which was probably one of the most exhilarating, amazing experiences in my whole career. There's no doubt. It was just a phenomenal 3 years.
Well, I was going to finish this section by just saying that. Yeah, I mean, it must have been remarkable experience. There was no part of the world I didn't see you in, and with social media, so I'm more than well aware of the work that involves. It looks great, but it's very, very hard work, always being on message, and never having a bad day and that sort of stuff. So two things. Firstly, I'm thrilled that you've handed over to Claire McNaught, who I I contributed a tiny, minuscule to her training, but also urged her when she was saying, "Oh, I don't know if I want to. You got to do it."
Yeah,
She's wonderful. But
fantastic.
for you, there has to be a letdown now. I mean, it's there's a sigh of relief. You don't have to get on a plane just for another month or whatever.
Yeah,
But how do you deal with that letdown? Because
yeah.
that's the peak, isn't it?
Yeah, I totally get, and for me, it was the people. We had a wonderful office bear team, which included Claire McNaught, Tim Graham as vice presidents, and the rest of that senior leadership team. We were really cohesive. We really became good friends. We worked incredibly hard, as you said. Everybody pulled their weight, but we had a lot of fun, and to me, that's the bit that I've almost missed the most because it was, daily contact, and that does go. And we have in terms of governance, you come off the council completely. There's no rule for a past president. But I think living locally, there's still a bit of contact, and
Right.
I can drop in and catch up with people, and certainly still have kept very much in touch, but not involved.
Yeah.
So it is a fairly sudden stop. You're absolutely right. Um, Fortunately, I've had things to go back to. I was essentially given a sabbatical by my university, the University of Edinburgh, my NHS colleagues, and stepped back from my role in NHS education for Scotland. So all of those, I stepped back because, as you say, the presidency is almost 100% full-on job. I did a little bit of clinical work, but I had to stop nearly everything else. But I've been able to go back to all of those things.
You back
So I'm back to
back
my
operating?
clinical work.
Yeah.
Yeah, back operating and back with some academic
Right.
activities again, and back with NHS Education for Scotland doing some of the national things in Scotland. So I've had something. My diary's certainly been full, but it's not been that
Yeah.
total. I think you made a really good point. Having to be on message at all time, having to be, available to just ad hoc give after dinner talks, to do presentations here and there, to be contacted by the media.
Yeah.
So that side of it is, I think, probably a bit of a relief.
One of your
But there's bits I miss.
um, I always had enormous admiration for David Carter,
Yeah,
who, of course, was Regis Chair in Edinburgh,
yeah,
because he had that amazing ability to stand up at a minute's notice and say something that was just right.
absolutely.
And if you analyzed it, it was often completely empty, as in there was nothing in it. But it sounded right always. He never said the wrong thing. He was
Yeah,
remarkable like that. So,
and still is
yeah.
unbelievable. And probably the best after dinner speaker I've
Yeah.
ever known, and that was always prepared. But I think you're right. You have to be able to be on message,
Oh, yeah.
and to say something at a minimum notice. So that side of it has probably reduced, which is a blessing.
Right. So let's pivot. So
Yeah.
when the lights go out, and you're having a dinner party, and you have two spare seats at the dinner party, and you can invite anyone from history, alive or dead.
Oh my goodness. Um, uh, One of the things I guess I really enjoyed during my presidency was understanding more of the history of medicine, the history of the colleges. At school, history was not a subject I enjoyed, but as I've got older, I've enjoyed it more and more. And something I've tried to do whenever we're hosting people at the college is just tell a little story about something historical. And so I guess some of the characters that have walked the floors before us would be at least something that would be of interest. People like Lister, Simpson. When you read of how they innovated at the
Yeah,
time, how they discovered things, how they Simpson testing out either on himself at a dinner party,
yeah.
and the stories like that were incredible. So I must admit, for at the minute, that's some of the things that just jumped to mind. I'd love to have
Okay.
had some of these people just to know how they thought, how they innovated, how they discovered things.
Okay,
Fascinating.
we'll go with Lister and Simpson, both of whom would be fired today if they did what they
Totally,
did.
totally. They wouldn't get away with it now.
What happens when we die?
Well, I guess from a personal point of view, I have a faith that would mean I would expect to be going somewhere very rich and, in heaven.
Okay. All right.
That would be my answer to that one.
If not a surgeon, what would you like to be?
Ah. I've always had a fascination with business. I don't think I could be a business person. I don't think I would have the mentality or the ability or the skill set to do it. But I've always been intrigued by people who have an idea and just turn that into an opportunity. And I look at friends, look at some family members who, that's what they've done and done very well with it. And I just that fascinates me, and so it would be something I'd love to consider. I'd like to have done, but I just don't think I would have had the skill set to do it. But that's what my other, I guess, interest would be.
Oscar Traynor, when I interviewed him, gave us his two dinner guests, Elon Musk and
Oh,
Michael O'Leary. Both, interesting people. And I said to him at the time, I said, "How do you think they would have got on?" He said, "I don't know, they'd be very interesting." And he WhatsApped me this week he said, with the row going on between Elon Musk and Michael O'Leary, I said, "It's just as well you didn't invite them to dinner."
it would have been a very entertaining dinner if it had happened this week, wouldn't it?
Um, what's the best book you ever read?
I'm not an avid reader. I don't read as much as I probably should. I read a lot more when I was younger as a child. Shame to say, even on holidays, I'm not very good at picking up on a book to read.
Well, you can
It's
switch it out
interesting.
for the best movie then.
Best movie. Okay, so I'm a Bourne fan. My family will know that I like Matt Damon and the Bourne series of films. Yeah, if that was my go-to, it's probably about the only series of films where I've watched repeated
Again
episodes
and
and
again.
watched
Yeah.
repeated time. And I guess it's action. I like action movies, a little bit of
Gratuitous violence.
absolutely, yeah, a little bit, not too much. But that would be my family certainly pull the leg about that. That's what you'd watch if you'd any downtime.
Now, not at your funeral, but at your wake, what song would you like played?
Oh, I don't have any, there's no go-to song. I like such a wide variety of music and listen to anything. So I would leave that for others to pick because whatever they enjoy, I'd enjoy.
And at your wake, um, what would you like them to say about you?
Oh, um, I think that he put everything into whatever he was involved in. He gave everything, committed, um, certainly professionally, but much beyond that. Family is really important. We have four fantastic kids, now all married, and four lovely grandchildren. And I, just love spending time with them, and try to give everything to them. So yeah, professionally, I've given it everything. Hopefully to family, to friends, to the other things I'm involved with. Outside medicine, I tried to give everything. So that hopefully would be something to talk about.
Do you have a talent that you would like to have that you don't have, like a choice, a bucket list talent?
I was never a very good artist. Couldn't draw much. I admire that so much, and some of my colleagues have picked that up as a hobby, and have produced some wonderful things. And I just love to be able to do something like that, but
You,
just can't. But one of the lovely gifts I got when I finished at the college was a beautiful scenic painting, and just thought, amazing talent being able to do that. One of the wonderful things you get at the end of presidency too is your portrait painted,
yeah,
and seeing how somebody can get such a likeness. That's an incredible skill. I also remember, even in the surgical world, working with a vascular surgeon in Belfast called Aris Barris Desai, and he drew every operation he
yeah,
did, and it was masterful.
yeah.
And I could just never do that. But that's always what I've admired. It's a skill, a talent that I certainly don't have. But yeah, it's just the first thing that I thought of when you said being able to paint or have that artistic talent.
I remember Aris Barrister telling me, he became very well known during the kneecapping fashion,
Yeah.
because of all the popliteal arteries.
Popliteal arteries, yeah.
I remember him telling me that he got an urgent call down to casualty one day at the height of kneecapping, and there was an ambulance had brought some guy in who'd been kneecapped, who was screaming on the top of his voice and holding on to his blood-stained knee, and screaming and shouting and one thing or another. And eventually they got him out of the ambulance, brought him into the trauma bay and one thing or another, and everybody disappeared in one thing or another. And the guy suddenly stopped screaming and said, "Are they gone?" And he went, "Yeah." And he said, "That's great." He says, "The bastards miss me."
There's a lot of stories during that time, but yeah, Aris Barris Desai, developed the popliteal shunt
Yeah,
to save a lot of limbs. So
yeah.
there was a lot of innovations came out of the troubles. Titanium plates for shattered skulls, and another innovation. So
Totally
yeah,
blanking on the name of the guy who found himself there at the beginning of the troubles in as the casualty consultant. William, I think was his name.
William Rutherford.
Yeah, who'd been in the missions in Solomon Islands for many
Yeah.
years.
Okay.
He came and gave us a talk in Trinity when we were medical students. There was a guy in this dead end job, suddenly the city blew up, and he said the two things that they learned to have in these with bombing, big bombs, was a bucket, two buckets, and one was full of loose change, so that people could go and use the telephone, because
Yeah.
otherwise they kept coming in saying, "Can I use your phone?" And the other was a big jar of Valium, just giving to people. He was a remarkable guy. Okay, now the stuff that really matters are the last couple of minutes. There are no real right or wrong answers to this, apart from what I believe. But here we go. Window or aisle?
Short hole, it would be aisle, long hole, window.
Okay. Beer or wine?
Wine.
Home or away?
Home.
Cats or dogs?
Neither. Really neither, but I'll go for dogs.
Beatles or Stones?
Beatles.
Mac or PC?
Mac.
Ron, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, John.
Really enjoyed the time. I should say to you that I think I watched your presidency with enormous admiration. I think you did, many are called, few are chosen, and not every president does a memorable job. But I thought you were an outstanding president.
That's very kind.
And I think the college will be very proud of you.
Well, it was an enormous privilege, and it's very kind, John. Really appreciate that. I loved every minute of it. Lots of happy memories.
So thank you so much for spending time today.
Thank you. Thanks, John, and best wishes.